About the business of being into the book of Ecclesiastes, and we are into chapter 10. I'll be reading this morning as we work through it from the English Standard Version, which is slightly different than what Max read to us, but the sentiment certainly is the same. We have been studying this book for a while now, and if you haven't picked up on the fact that it has some tones of being philosophical, you probably haven't really paid much attention to what the book is saying. It's a level that it takes us to that we don't often think about. It's trying to prod us, as we'll see in chapter 12 when we get there. It's the actual phrase that he uses of trying to prod us to think about things that we don't normally think about, to take our minds places that we wouldn't just naturally go to get us to stop and ponder and consider. And that is really the great dilemma of the human heart, is we very rarely take time to consider serious things. Let me just take you backwards a little bit. I know we've been over this ground, so I trust that you don't find this too tedious in any way. But in order for us to understand chapter 10 and see where he is now, I'd like us to just step back and to see, as it were, the greater context of where chapter 10 is. We're going to just literally run through the first 9 chapters for you to understand what's building to this point. If you've been with us, this will be familiar. And again, I apologize for the review. I'm sure you have this all memorized. You know that he begins with the phrase, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. And that there is a key phrase to this book that I have emphasized every Sunday that I've been up here. And it is simply the phrase, under the sun, which is the experience of looking at life without God. If we were to take our lives and just examine them just as they are, they immediately, instantaneously, it becomes vain, empty, pointless. Without God, you immediately have nothingness. You immediately have a universe that is dead and void and accidental and has absolutely no reason for being here and has absolutely no reason to give it for being here, and never can meaning be found because there is no meaning in a meaningless existence. It just happened upon itself. So we live in this period of time, if we were to remove God from the equation, where the universe has spit us into existence, and the sun that holds our universe together and gives us life on planet Earth is dying. I mentioned this some time ago, and I know that's not a revelation to you, and I don't want you to imply from this that I think this is how the earth will end. I think we have a revelation that's clear from God, that's from beyond the sun, that tells us that in fact he has other plans for us than this. But the sun will burn out. And because the sun will burn out and will go back to exactly the way the universe existed prior to it ever coming into existence, and again, this is not things we think about, but consider this. Because it started in nothing, and this ball of energy now exists and will eventually burn out because your batteries die, everything in your gas goes in your car, and eventually the energy gets used up, it's going to die. Everybody knows this. It will eventually go back, the universe will go back to nothing. So everything that happens in the middle instantaneously means nothing. Who talks about this? Who even thinks about this? Everything is winding down. And I don't know how many people think somehow that they're creating some sort of meaning within their lives just by being who they are. It can't be found. You don't find meaning just because you have a nice family and because you found the cure for cancer. Everybody dies. And in the universe that we live in, under the sun, there can never be meaning. That's why he starts the book exactly the way he starts. Vanity of vanities. Vanity of vanities. Everything is pointless. Everything is meaningless. What does man gain from all the work that you work and all the labors that you labor and all the family and life and the money in the bank and all that you're doing? What's the point of it? With which you toil under the sun. There's that phrase. If we examine life without God, instantaneously means nothing, and we cannot be inserting meaning into meaninglessness. This came to me a while back from somebody in the church here who's actually not here this morning. He found this in a Bible, in the front cover of a Bible in a motel room. And it was a piece of paper with another piece of paper clipped onto it with a little sticker that said, "Warning, literal belief in this book may endanger your health and life." Interesting reading. So the little flyer attached to it, long page, verbose rather page in my opinion, starts this way. I'll get right to it. I'm an atheist. Don't worry, I don't necessarily want to convert you, although I think the world would be a better place without religion. But there are a few points I want to share. My life is not empty or meaningless. There's a problem with atheism right now, right there. I mean, it is blatantly, obviously ridiculous. You can't have it both ways. You don't get that. You don't then get to decide for yourself how you're going to find meaning. It's already intrinsically meaningless. You can't now decide you're going to insert meaning into a universe where the sun is going to die. It can't happen. My life is not empty or meaningless. This is the only life I will ever have, so I'm going to enjoy it as much as I can. And I read between the lines, therefore, I would never believe in a God who will give me commands and make me obey them and take all the fun out of life. I'm just reading between the lines there. This gives it much meaning. No, it doesn't. This is the two-faced, wrong-headed thinking that atheism presents in the age that we live in. That on the one hand, you can live your life with meaning without God. It is impossible by definition. The moment you remove God, you instantaneously remove all sense of any purpose or meaning of anybody's existence. It is gone instantly. You cannot now take it up and try to fit it in and insert it there. Who is to say the meaning that you have found is actually meaningful? What if I found a different meaning that contradicts your meaning? Who's right? Answer: neither one of us is right, because there can never be meaning. You don't get to insert meaning for yourself. But I can only try and make people I care about as happy as I can before my time comes. What a nice guy. Who says you're right to care about people? On what standard do you base your morality to decide that you have the right, that you're right to care for people? Maybe you're right to kill people. You wouldn't even know. You could never tell. Who's to say? Remember, there is no God. And the moment God is removed, you immediately have a vacuum of all common sense. But that's never stopped anybody from disbelieving in God. It's never stopped anybody from carrying on and pressing through and believing somehow that life can still have meaning. But as we've seen in chapter 1, all streams run to the sea. The sea is never full. All these ideas keep coming and coming and coming. We never have any answers. We never have any solutions. The moment God is removed, we have nothingness. I said in my heart, verse 2, "Come now, I will test you with pleasure. Enjoy yourself. Behold, this also was emptiness." The human heart, the moment that there's no God, what is there to live for? Well, I guess I'll just live for pleasure. So he does this little experiment, and he tries everything that can possibly be done, and he realizes that none of this produces meaning. There's never meaning in a meaningless universe. Chapter 3, he looks at the world around him. And you remember there's a time to be born and a time to die. And he sees that there's all these random events that are happening to him. There's a time to plant and a time to sow. And it dawned on him, I'm not in charge of these seasons. Wait a second. Maybe there's somebody outside of our snow globe glass that actually is running the universe. Maybe that's what's going on. And all that's happening here, I'm just caught up in it. What happens to the children of men? What happens to the beast is the same. As one dies, so dies the other. It's all meaningless. It doesn't matter who you are. They all have the same breath. Man has no advantage over the beasts. All is vanity. It doesn't matter what you do. All go to one place. All are from the dust, and to dust all return. And so he looks at these seasons. He sees that there's a time and a time and place for every matter under heaven. And he concludes in verse 14, I perceive that whatever God does, all these events and all that's taking place in my life, nothing can be added to it, nothing taken from it. God's got this plan. Why does he do it? God has done it so that the chaos of our world will cause the human heart to never be settled and to realize that we must fear God. You notice how after there's an earthquake or after some catastrophic event on the earth, one of the first reactions that people often have, crowd into churches. Churches open up and they get full for a few weeks and there's prayer meetings and all that goes on because suddenly the human heart realizes, I'm not in charge. I'm not in control. And God has built that into the world that we live in so that the human heart will always hunger for something beyond itself. And you're always going to be looking, hopefully, for God. And so he warns us in chapter 5, be careful. Now, if your heart starts to think that there's something missing, because there is, and you're going to start looking for something beyond yourself, be careful when you go to the house of God. Guard your steps. Don't go trouncing into God's house and say, oh, I've got this thing figured out. I know how I can scotch tape God into my life and get enough religion to be smart enough to handle it. I can make meaning with a little bit of knowledge. Be careful. This is a serious thing. Draw near to listen is better than to offer the sacrifice of fools. Pay attention. Don't just come in and start going through the motions of some religious experience. They do not know that they're doing evil. Be careful. And then verse 1 of chapter 6, you might remember, he begins and tells us that there is an evil that I have seen under the sun. And it lies heavy on the heart of man. That if they don't find something in the place of worship in the house of God that settles their heart, there is something that happens in the heart of man where it's continually this dissatisfaction in his spirit. All the toil of man is for his mouth, as the proverb is, yet his appetite is not satisfied. All the work and labor that I do to try and produce a good house, I need a bigger house. Everything I buy, everything I own, it only lasts so long, it only satisfies so long. I need something else. I need another thing. I need another thing. And the human heart is never satisfied. There is a longing in us for something real. There is a hunger for us for something deep. There is a searching for meaning, and we cannot find it. And we're trying it here, we're looking there, we're trying sex, we're trying relationships, we're trying drugs. Why do you think young people are on drugs today? Why do you think this problem is constantly a problem? Why do you think? Because they figured out there's nothing here. There's nothing. They're dropping out. His appetite is never satisfied. So chapter 7, it gives us some wisdom. Sharpen our thinking. Make us sit up and take notes. It's better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting. It's better to go to a funeral today than to have a Thanksgiving dinner. How does that tip your scales? Not necessarily every day of your life, but to keep you focused on what really matters. It's a prod to take your heart somewhere you would never go. To consider that you just can't insert meaning into your life in a meaningless universe and decide that it's there. There has to be something beyond us that you've got to cling to. This is the end of all mankind, and the living lay at the heart. So I say in chapter 8, verse 2, keep the king's commands. You want some wisdom? Here's some wisdom. Obey, absolutely, the king's commands. That's where you'll find life. That's where meaning is found. The exact opposite of what the human heart would say. Keep the king's commands because of God's oath to him. Do not be hasty, go from his presence. Do not blow this book off as if it doesn't matter. Do not say, I don't need the king's commands. Do not take your stand in an evil cause, for he does. The king's in charge. You are his subject, and it is wise for you to bow to the king. So chapter 9 last week, we looked at this, talking about wisdom and reminding ourselves of how brief our lives are. He who is joined with the living has hope. A living dog is better than a dead lion. The living know that they will die, but the dead know nothing. They have no reward, for the memory of them is forgotten. And so this chapter 9 was all about the wisdom of living in obedience to the king's commands and knowing that if we're going to obey the king's commands, we submit to the sovereignty of the king who's over all and rules over all, and my life comes in line with his commands. It's better to be alive. There's always hope. I can always make this life count. I can actually do something that counts for all of eternity when it is connected to the God of all eternity. There's actual meaning to be found when our lives are connected to him. If you remember how chapter 9 ends, wisdom is better than weapons of war. He has this little scenario that he tells. I saw an example under the sun of a city that was besieged. A small city was besieged by a great king. I don't have it all memorized, but you remember the gist. And they built siege works against it. And this poor but wise man came and had this idea how to defeat them. You remember that little parable? And so he comes and he whispers his idea and whatever it is. And so this little city defeats the big army. You just never know what's going to happen. The race is not to the swift, the battle to the strong. Time and chance happen to them all. And so we have this picture here of how great wisdom is, but they forgot him. They ignored him. Is wisdom me therefore doesn't matter? Wisdom is the most important thing you can hold on to. A wisdom of chasing down God, understanding how to live your life in the light of God, bringing your life in light with what really matters. Wisdom is what we chase after. But, he says at the end of the chapter, one sinner destroys much good. Here's a piece of advice for us all. Just keep in mind, wisdom is greater, but know this. All it takes is one phone call to one principal's office, and suddenly something happens and all the ripples take place, and this is just from my own experience. All it takes is one sinner to change the whole equilibrium and decide, we're not doing that anymore. You're not bringing God in here. We're not going to pray before we have this meeting. I don't know who you have to respect. One sinner destroys much good. So we come to chapter 10. And now he's been telling us about the great wisdom of us chasing down God and living for God and finding meaning in God and giving our lives to God and directing ourselves to God. And now he tells us the opposite side. Beware, because there's this other side of things, and it's called foolishness. It's called folly. Now, a fool in the New Testament, in the biblical sense, a fool in the biblical sense is somebody who lives their life as if God doesn't exist. Simply put. And he starts chapter 10 this way. Dead flies make the perfume's ointment give off a stench. So a little folly outweighs wisdom and honor. One sinner destroys much good. Here's the apothecaries. In the apothecary, they're mixing oils and perfumes and doing things, and they finally got the ointment just so. And then along comes some flies who get stuck in the heavy cream or the thick oils or whatever, and it dies and it starts to decay. And this thing that once smelled nice, just a few flies get in and poof, this reeks. One sinner destroys much good. A little folly, a little stupidity, a little tiny bit of foolishness, and the whole thing falls apart. Beware of folly. This is not something to mess around with. And foolishness is everywhere. And the fool is the one who you will spot quicker than anybody else. Let me ask you this. How many cockroaches would it take to spoil your Thanksgiving dinner? You're mashing the potatoes and you look up and you see how much of one cockroach would it take for you to decide, I'm not eating that. It usually doesn't take much for us to decide this is inedible. That's all it's saying. A little folly. The smallest little thing. And by the way, as an aside, can I just say, we need to watch our hearts, because foolishness and folly is always looking for a place to get its foothold in there. And as soon as you allow some foolishness to get a hold, one little foolish move takes the wheels off of your whole life. Your reputation is gone. Perhaps your career is gone. Everything is blown into flames because of one stupid move. A little folly. A wise man's heart inclines him to the right. A fool's heart to the left. I apologize to the left-handed people here this morning, but that's what the text says. And this is an ancient Near East kind of idea, that the right is the place of good and the left is the place of wickedness and evil. Now, don't take that literally and get upset if you're left-handed. Don't. By the way, from what I understand, the Latin word sinister actually means left-handed. Can't help that, I didn't make that up. But that's all a part of the history of this idea. And if you remember even from Matthew 25, when the Son of Man comes in his glory, all the angels with him, he will sit in his glorious throne. Before him he will gather all the nations, and he will separate people one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will place the sheep on his right, but the goats on his left. Same idea. So, the fool's heart, his heart, that's where foolishness comes from. His heart is bent towards the left, towards the wrong. He doesn't care about God. He's not interested in seeking wisdom. He's just going to live for the moment. And he's warning us. Even the fool, all he has to do is walk down the road. I mean, it's so obvious. It's such a public thing. This is just an expression, an exaggerated idea. The fool walks down the road and lacks sense. And just by walking down the road, everybody knows that guy's a fool. Just the simplest. You're just in the parking lot. You see the way some guy's handling his children or talking to his wife or whatever the moment. Doesn't take long. That guy's a fool. I mean, you wouldn't say those words, but you understand the principle. You can spot it a mile away. It cannot be hidden. That's the idea. Be wary of foolishness. Do you want to know what a fool looks like? Sit in a public meeting. Go to work someday. The anger of the ruler rises against you. I think the text that Max read to us said if your boss is angry at you. What happens when you want to spot a fool really quick? Tell them that they're wrong or they're out of line. Watch their pride get up in your face. What? Who do you think I am? Who do you think you are to tell me? What do you say? Well, I don't have to take this. Well, you can't fire me. I quit. Seen this in church business meetings occasionally, I hate to say, not necessarily at Pinegrove. People do that. Well, if you're good, I'll show you. Actually, you're not showing me anything except that you're a fool, with all due respect. The anger, something rises against you, do not leave your place. Don't assume automatically that you're right. And if the preacher gets up and says, by nature, you are born under the wrath of God and you are a sinner, the fool doesn't want to hear anything like that. The fool is not interested in listening to anything like that. The fool will get up and turn around and walk away from God. You're the one who's the fool, he'll say. You've got some nonsense in your head. You've got a mental illness. You've got to have a crutch. You're the one with the problem. Oh, there's anger immediately. I have never in my life met more angry people than atheists. I don't know how many you know. This isn't always true. It's a broad brush statement, but they are always seething. Well, maybe it's because I'm a preacher. So they feel they have the right. Let's go. Let's do this thing. There's almost never a calmness about a conversation with them. Never. There's an immediate, visceral hatred. Where does it? What? Relax. Oh, wait a minute. Maybe you're a fool. That's why your anger is rising up. That's what's going on here. With all due respect, I'm not trying to put anybody down or call anybody. I'm just referring to it in a biblical sense. Calmness will lay a great effort to rest. There's an evil that I've seen under the sun. This foolishness goes all the way to the top. This foolishness doesn't just reside in a few people here and there and your neighbors and that brother-in-law and son-in-law that you married into your home. No, there's an evil that I've seen under the sun. As if an error proceeded from the ruler, it's all the way to the top. Folly, this foolishness, starts at the government level. Now, this is just a broad-brushed, generalism. It's not saying that every government in every age or every single king or prime minister or president or whatever the case, but this is how far it goes. It can go all the way to the people who run the land. They're foolish. And folly is set all the way in the top. And the rich sit in the low places, so the people who should really be running the show are down low, unconsidered. And I've seen slaves on horses, the people who should be the working. Why don't you run this thing? You get up, and the prince, who should be on the throne, he's walking around like a slave. The whole thing is upside down, and suddenly what's right is wrong, what's wrong is right. Sound familiar? Interesting. I wonder if we're being run by fools. It's how it works in the world. Suddenly, you're the oddball if you want to believe in God or have your faith in anything beyond yourself. What's the matter with you? You're crazy? And suddenly you're the weirdo if you decide you're going to live your life in purity and save yourself for marriage. What's the matter with you? What are you, crazy? Suddenly you're the weirdo if you want to live your life according to the commands of God and do what's right and be moral and not fudge on your taxes and not cheat at work and not tell a lie to keep everything's smooth and whatever, and you're going to be up. What's the matter with you? You want to live under integrity and believing someday your life is going to be judged? What's wrong with you? Upside down thinking. What's wrong is right, what's right is wrong. We're run by fools. He who digs a pit will fall into it. These are just some phrases that not unfamiliar to us. We use the same phrases in English different ways. This is what folly produces. He who digs a pit will fall into it. We have a little phrase in English. We say something like this: if you play with fire, you'll get burned. Same idea. If you're the one who's being foolish enough to try and dig a pit and get people to fall in and you're conniving and wheeling and dealing and doing something sneaky and you think you're so smart, you're just digging a pit for yourself. Ultimately, the fool thinks he's getting ahead, and a serpent will bite him who breaks through a wall. Now, that doesn't quite capture our culture because we don't have walls, for the most part. Some countries still have walls. I know I've been in Southern Ireland, and it's very common. What I understand, everybody's property has got stone walls. It's just normal. You don't have, these vague kind of, my property goes to that tree. You would see it. And you walk along somebody's street, every house has a wall in front of it. This is this culture that this is coming from. And if you were important, the wall would be high. Because the more important you are, the less likely you are that you want people climbing your wall. And then you would put barbed wire around your wall. And we were once in Ireland walking along the street, and this massive wall with barbed wire. And I said, what is that? They said, it's a cemetery. Yeah, trying to keep people in, obviously. That's just weird. But here's the picture. You don't want this. Why is there a wall? Because there's delineation of what is my property, with how far you can go. But the fool says, I don't care about your stupid wall. I don't care about your rules. I don't care about your commands. Those walls are coming down. I'm doing what I want. And I want what you've got. I'm going to take what you have. I don't care about any of your stupid ideas of what the parameters are. Who are you in charge? I'm pulling these walls down. And so the fool starts pulling through the walls. But meanwhile, this ancient wall in the picture here, it's probably got some vines, and not uncommonly, a snake would crawl up and in the heat of the eastern sun get out in a shady spot in a crook in the wall, hiding behind some vines or whatever, and the fool comes along, starts pulling the wall down, sticks his hand into a crevice. Ouch! A serpent will bite him who tries to break through the wall. There's no help to someone who wants to tear down the walls of the commandments of God. He who quarries stones will be hurt by them. That's obvious, although Murray's here today and he doesn't look any the worse for wear. I think he's been quarrying stones his whole life. So maybe that proverb, we should scratch it out of the Bible. But you get the idea. He who messes around with big rocks, the rocks are going to fall on you. Who splits logs, you're splitting logs. These are big, long things. He who plays with fire will get burned. Watch it. Foolishness has a way of snapping back on you. The iron is dull. Want to see what the foolish person is like? The iron is blunt. I've picked up my axe. Doesn't matter that it's not sharp. I'm going to chop some wood anyways. If the iron is blunt, one does not sharpen the edge. He must use more strength, and his wife is there nagging him. Why don't you just, shut up, woman, I'm working. And he's just going at it. This is the fool. It's only common sense that you would stop. You got a tool, you want to do something, let's stop. Consider, let's think about this, let's do the cautious thing, let's be wise, not the fool. Plow right in, grab the thing, I'll show you how. Let's go to work here, I got this, I can handle this. But that's the fool. Hasty, quick. Who cares about any of this talking about God and put him in your life and figuring out what we should do? I got this handled. But wisdom helps one succeed. If the serpent bites before it is charmed, there is no advantage to the charmer. We're actually not sure how far back charming serpents goes, but it's mentioned in the book of Ecclesiastes. It's an ancient concept, which of course we don't necessarily see in our buskers in Canada. But I don't know what this guy's doing, watching TV or something. Let's pay attention to the snake. But it's the same thing. If the serpent bites before it's charmed, I don't know how you do that, okay? It's just an expression. Then, you get this, I don't need to practice. I don't need to, I'm going to make money. I get out in the street, pick the lid off, and then the serpent's like, and latches on your arm before you even know what you're doing. Surprise! Foolishness has a way of destroying you. But the hasty one is the foolish one. Charging in, I've got this thing, I can handle this thing. There's no advantage to the charmer if you're lying in convulsions, drooling, about to die, because you didn't take the time to charm your snake. The words of the wise man's mouth win him favor, but the lips of a fool consume him. Well, I don't know how often you have met people that disregard God or put God into the back burner of their lives, but they often can tell you the 57 reasons, quite verbose reasons, why they're right and you're wrong. I've got the 6,429 contradictions in the Bible that tell you what this is that and this is not, and you shouldn't, and this is this, and besides that, and I've got all these crazy arguments that don't go anywhere and all seem convoluted. I don't know, maybe you've not talked to people very much and done much witnessing, but this is not uncommon. And they seem to come from every left field with an idea and this and that, and besides, I once heard a scientist say and throwing stuff in, and they got all this, whoa, what am I? It's like a sea of nonsense. I'm trying to fight through to have a conversation with you. Why? The lips of the fool consume him. All my arguments are waterproof and watertight, and I don't need to hear from you, and I've got this down, and I know everything, and I've got this figured out, and let me tell you why you're wrong, and blah, 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 I'm not listening to you, and you don't even matter. It's a fool. The beginning of his words is foolishness. By the way, isn't that a great expression? The lips of a fool. What do you do with your mouth? You eat, you consume. The lips of a fool consume him. That puts a picture in your head. How do you... what is that? The beginning of his words, of his mouth is foolishness, right from the start, and the end, madness. Doesn't get any better. The fool multiplies words, though no man knows what is to be. Who can tell him what is after him? But he will get up and tell you without a doubt that everything is going to happen this way. The universe will die a heat death. Nothing matters. Everything, it doesn't matter what you do, blah, 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 whatever. They've got this all worked out, this scheme. This is it. This is how it's going to be. I know how it's going. Don't worry, I've got this figured out because I saw a scientific whatever, and I'm telling you. No one knows what is to be, but he's quite convinced what is to be. The toil of the field wearies him. Doesn't know the way to the city. There's a great expression. He doesn't know how to step out of his front door and read a street sign, look at a map. He can't figure out which way is which way, because when you come unmoored from God, you have no moorings. And now you don't know what is right and what is wrong. You don't know which way to go anywhere in life. You've got your own heart that you're trying to follow, and you get so tired of trying to figure out how to live and what is right and what is best and what I should do and how to fix this and what lie will cover that and how I cover that lie with another lie. And it gets more convoluted and more confusing and more laborious, and the weight and the work of foolish living. I have no idea how you do it. Toil, the fool, wearies him. He can't even find his way. The city lights are off in the distance. Anybody can see them, but not the fool. He has no idea what he's doing because he's come unhinged from God. Woe to you, O land, when your king is a child, when he is immature, when he doesn't know what he's doing. It's not necessarily literally a child, it's just the idea. When he's immature, and your princes feast in the morning. This is a land that is overcome by foolishness. Morning is not the time for feasting. When your princes feast in the morning, happy are you, O land, when your king is the son of nobility, and your princes feast at the proper time for strength, and not for drunkenness. Can I just lay this bare a little bit and suggest that you can even look at this as your own heart? Woe to you, O heart, when your king, when your ruler is just an immature person who doesn't know what they're doing, and you're feasting every time you get and living life to your fullest and doing what you want to do. But happy are you, O land. Happy and content is the life and the heart when your king is the son of nobility, and you have submitted to the king, and you live your life in sense, and your princes feast at the proper time for strength and not for drunkenness. And this is what happens when they rule the land with foolishness, through sloth. The roof sinks in. It's just some obvious statements. Through indolence, laziness, inaction, idleness. Through indolence, the house leaks. Here's the mantra of every fool: live, eat, drink, and be merry. Bread is for laughter. Wine gladdens life. Money answers everything. That's all we live for. That's all that matters. That's all that we go for. And what do we have? Slothfulness, emptiness. Even in your thoughts, he finishes the chapter. Interesting little phrase, almost just thrown in there. Even in your thoughts, do not curse the king, nor in your bedroom curse the rich. For the bird of the air will carry your voice, or some winged creature tell the matter. That's a piece of advice for all the wise people who want to complain, who want to say how foolish the world is. We're submitting to the king. We live our lives according to the king, and it's not our place to be cursing the fools around us. And if you ever heard that little phrase, when someone asks you, how did you hear that? And you say, oh, a bird told me. A little bird told me. You ever heard that little phrase? It comes out of the book of Ecclesiastes right here. Bird of the air just means you never know how they're going to hear. And when you don't need a fool to hear that you think that they're a fool. Let's get practical as we try to pull these bits and pieces together from this chapter. The greater essence of this book is reminding us that our life is vain and empty outside of God. And he has been pushing us and prodding us to take and consider the importance of having God in our lives at the very core of who we are. It is the place, it is the way we find meaning. It is how our lives have purpose when they are connected to something beyond ourselves, to the obedience of the King. Submit to the King's commands. And there is wisdom in this. But beware, beware. We live in a world of folly, of foolishness, of hearts that could care less about God. Eat, live, drink, be merry. Money's the answer to everything. That's all that counts. And they never stop, they never ponder, they never consider for a single fleeting moment that life has no meaning at all unless God is the very core of it, and I am not the fool for putting God at the center of my life. I am not the fool for submitting to the King. I am not the fool for obeying the King's commands and living according to something that ultimately matters beyond this world. I am not the fool. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for your word. We pray in its simplicity this morning, you would encourage us in the things of God, that you would remind us of our need of submission to the King. And Father, as we live in this world of foolishness, that you would give us strength to stand up for what is right, to be wary of the foolishness that would seek to find its way into our own hearts, that would seek to unravel our lives, that we would be continually submissive in wisdom to you. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.